Early Filipinos believed in the concept of life after death. This includes a wide variety of funeral and burial customs that Filipinos observe to honor and remember the deceased loved ones. The Isneg people, namely an indigenous group in Apayao province, have a unique culture that has kept them alive to this day and is still developing, especially in burying the dead. When an Isneg dies, he will undergo several pre-burial ceremonies. First, the body will be washed with water to clean it of all dirt and impurity. Relatives of the deceased will then prepare their clothes, as they believe that ancestral spirits recognize them by their clothes. After this practice, people would be informed of the death of their neighbors before proceeding to the offering of food and sacrificial animals. Apart from that, what makes burial customs very unique and strange is that they bury the bodies under the kitchen. The body will be warmed first, and the relatives will say goodbye before finally meeting the cold earth and earth. After the burial, the abandoned family home would be pelted with stones as an act of exorcising evil spirits. Bonfires usually occur at night, but in the case of Ilocanos, bonfires occur during morning. In Ilocos, especially in Paui, a series of rules and practices are implemented whenever a family member dies. When an Ilocano dies, a bonfire is lit in front of their house. Because they believe that fire will guide the spirits of the deceased to the afterlife. The night will be filled with sounds of sorrow, crying and mourning in the form of half crying and half singing with alternating high and low notes. Relatives of the deceased will then read their messages. If it was the mother of the deceased, she would tell her all the deeds her son had done throughout his life. If it was his wife, he would tell her all his promises looking forward to the future. Both must wear black clothing, a headscarf, and a headscarf called a manto, that covers head to toe. Grief can sometimes be a good thing and pleasing to the eye, especially for Tinguian people. Over several weeks they would dress the deceased in his best clothes and sit him in a chair. Sometimes they even put a lit cigarette between their lips. A chicken is placed behind the chair where the body sits as a sacrifice. A pig is also offered to the spirits while its intestines are hung above the door of the house and taken away after burial. Death does not restrict Tinguis from sitting, dressing up, or smoking, and their bodies were hung in coffins and placed on a cliff. The people of Sagada believe that the higher the coffin is placed, the higher the chances of the soul of the dead reaching the afterlife. This is also related to their belief that the spirits or anato of the dead can bring good or bad luck to living people. The way the dead dress in the Philippines determines their social class at the time they lived. Malans, 2003. According to Omingan, 2004, there are 3 types of clothing worn during burial. The Angkayan or upper-class people wear Los Oden, a garment consisting of black and white stripes which is used as upper clothing. Another model is the Bagan, worn by middle-class people. Meanwhile, Kudo or poor people use Nababa. All of these upper garments are paired with the same wane or G-string as well as a headband or ba, a 5-foot piece of dark blue hand-woven cloth. The death blanket also determines the social class of the deceased. Inus, a dark blue or black hand-woven cloth with orange stripes and a white design in the middle, would be worn by the rich. Meanwhile, Kalgo, a white hand-woven cloth with black stripes on the edges and middle, is worn by the poor. Before the dead person reaches their final destination, the youngest will sing Ikoko as a request for approval for the division of property. The children and grandchildren of the deceased are tasked with carrying the coffin to the burial location. They are not allowed to make any noise out of respect for the body. The juice of a rotting corpse or diang will be smeared on the coffin bearer in the belief that it brings good luck and the skills and abilities of the deceased. All family members had the opportunity to carry the coffin while lighting 7 torches even though it was already morning. It is believed to guide the spirits of the dead by lighting their path. It is normal for the dead to lie in a coffin and rest peacefully. Death can be similar to paralysis because the dead person can no longer move, stand, or sit. But in Bengay, sitting does not end with death, as they can still sit during burial. When someone there dies, he is blindfolded and tied to a chair placed next to the main entrance of his house. The night before the funeral, a special ritual is performed in which the elders give a kind of biographical chant of the deceased. When the body is buried, other members beat bamboo sticks, which will guide the deceased to heaven. When an Isneg dies, he will undergo several pre-burial ceremonies. First, the body will be washed with water to clean it of all dirt and impurity. Relatives of the deceased will then prepare their clothes, as they believe that ancestral spirits recognize them by their clothes. After this practice, people would be informed of the death of their neighbors before proceeding to the offering of food and sacrificial animals. Apart from that, what makes their burial customs unique is where they bury their bodies, under the kitchen. The body will be warmed first, and the relatives will say goodbye before finally meeting the cold earth and earth. After the burial, the abandoned family home would be pelted with stones as an act of exorcising evil spirits. The people of Sagada believe that the higher the coffin is placed, the higher the chances of the soul of the dead reaching the afterlife. This is also related to their belief that the spirits or anato of the dead can bring good or bad luck to living people. Meanwhile, another tradition in the Philippines belonging to the Ibaloy tribe, the dominant ethno-linguistic group in Kabayan, has a long tradition of mummifying the dead. Kabayan, Bengay, is famous for its centuries-old ancient mummies buried in caves scattered around the villages in the town. Mummification is associated with the preservation of the dead and their customs. In many areas, displaying the body at home is a form of respect for the afterlife. The mummification process using salt and spices and then burning it can take up to 2 years. When the bodily fluids were finally expelled, the mummy was placed in a pine coffin and buried in an artificial cave or niche dug out of solid rock. And there is a group of people in the Philippines known as Cavitano. When a Cavite person is about to die due to illness or old age, the person goes to the forest and chooses a tree. Then the family members build a small hut for the person under this tree, where they will live until they die. But they weren't just left to die. His family and friends came out to hollow out the trunk of the standing tree. When the person died, he was buried vertically in a hollow tree trunk. The symbolism is that just as a tree gives life to a tribe through its fruit and wood for its fire, so too when someone dies, they give their life back to the tree. Even our ancestors had unique ways of burying their bodies. This practice is not only based on their instincts, but is also related to their culture and religious beliefs. Manungal urns are one of the funerary practices that keep the history of Palawanos alive. And other death traditions in the Philippines are one of the ancient customs of burying the dead in the Philippines is by using burial jars. The Mitam anthropomorphic burial jar is a secondary earthenware burial vessel discovered in 1991 by the archaeological team of the National Museum of the Philippines in Jobs Cave, Barangay Pinal, Mitam, Sarangani Province, Mindanao, Philippines. It is unique in the Philippines and throughout Southeast Asia because the anthropomorphic, human-shaped, funerary urns are highly detailed and meticulous, with each unit having a specific head in a different emotional state. The head-shaped cover depicts various types of facial expressions: sadness, joy, contentment. The heads are plain, hollow, or covered in red and black paint. Some have earrings, some have tattoos. Some head-shaped coverings depict teeth while others have arms, female breasts, and male genitals. Additionally, the jars emphasize the Filipino people's popular belief in life after death. Then in the southern Mindanao region of the Philippines, the Bilan people have a truly unique burial ritual. They wrap the bodies in tree bark before lifting them to the level of the forest canopy. The body is kept for 3 weeks in someone's home and will be buried in a coffin carved into the tree trunk. After the meal, the coffin is hung from a selected tree and anchored to a branch. If the deceased is a married woman, her body cannot be buried as long as the husband has not given his parents a horse kura, or a buffalo carabao. Sometimes relatives don't have time to hang the body and place it at the foot of a tree. In the case of poor people, the person is simply stuffed or confined inside a bamboo pole, with the head and feet covered with pieces of cloth.